I hope you've had a great break and your learning is going well. Yeah. So far we have been doing what they call procedural programming. That means we have been either writing functions or writing basic procedures to do particular task. It's quite good, but sometimes you really need to reduce your work and do some stuff more fun, right? So that is why we will be moving into object-oriented programming in PHP, and it's quite an interesting topic. So in this tutorial, I'm just going to introduce it, then we will move into it in the later tutorials. So object-oriented programming in PHP, in short OOP, you might want to ask what that exactly is. So object-oriented programming, like we said, um, it has several advantages over procedural programming that we'll come to see. And like I said before, procedural programming is about writing procedures or functions that perform operations on data, definitely. Now, object-oriented programming is about creating objects that contain both data and function. Now, sometimes we have to declare in procedural programming, we declare our variables, we declare our functions, and then we work with the tool in a particular file. But what happens in object-oriented programming is we work with what they call classes, and these classes have their variables and functions that pertain to that particular class. We'll come to see about that, but I'm just trying to say that object-oriented programming is about creating objects that contain both the data and the functions. The data could be the variables, yeah, something like that. And the functions, we'll come to see what they are all about. Now, it has several advantages over procedural programming, and these are some of them. The first one is that it is faster to execute, right? And when I say it is faster to execute, since all of this has been bundled into a particular object, there is no much for there's no much referencing to certain locations and so on, because all of them have been bundled up and they kind of have they are in a container, so you can easily access both the properties of both the functions and the data, right? Object-oriented programming also provides a clear structure for your program. Yeah, I discovered that in most of our code, if I actually show you the different approaches that your mates use to um come up with the solutions for the past projects I have been giving, you see that most of you have actually have different code structures and so on. But object-oriented programming, there is a clear code structure that everyone who takes it is able to actually read and understand. Object-oriented programming also helps to keep your code dry. When they say dry, it means don't repeat yourself. That's a programming concept that is very good for programmers. You don't need to repeat functions over and over or variables over and over and so on. You just need to define them somewhere and use them. And this makes code easier to maintain, modify, and debug. Yeah. So OOP also makes it possible to create full reusable applications with less code and shorter development time. Just like we said, with all of these advantages above, that's going to be an advantage for OOP, because you have to just define some particular methods in a class somewhere and use them wherever in your file and different files and so on. Unlike in procedural programming, where you have data here, you move to a file, you have to access that data with several different methods and so on. But with OOP, you're able to create full reusable applications. Reusability is one thing that should be considered each time we are building applications. Yes, how reusable is it? Can you use it for another maybe project? Maybe you write a particular class This is when I say class, I am talking about OOP. We'll come to that. You write a particular class that you can use that class in another project. Say I have a user class that has some user methods, the user login, user register, and so on. I can use this class in several other projects without having to modify anything. Yeah, without having to modify anything. It also helps you to write less code. When I say less code, because you don't have to repeat yourself. You find that your code is shorter, right? And because of this, the development time reduces. Now, just a tip, when we talked about dry, which is don't repeat yourself, it is a principle that's all about reducing the repetition of code, right? And this principle is something every programmer needs to take into consideration when writing their code. Now, you see that all your bundles of code for maybe a particular user or for the user class is bundled in user class. Now you don't have to go somewhere and redefine this maybe properties that the user had or methods that the user had. You just have to call in the user class and use its methods, right? So these are some of the advantages of object-oriented programming. These are just some of them, like I said. And as we progress with the course, you are going to discover that there are several other examples. Now, there are some concepts that we'll be learning in object-oriented programming with PHP, right? Some of these concepts, I'm just going to introduce them here, and then when we actually start, we will talk about each and every one of them. We'll talk about classes in PHP, and we talk about objects, right? Maybe giving a brief of what they are is going to actually help you. Now, think of a class like the frame for say building a house, right? It's like the skeleton or the footprint or the blueprint for coming up with maybe an object. Now I'm going to use an object to define a class, and then when I come to an object, I'll say that an object is an instance of that class. Now I'm going to give an example. You have the fruit, for example. A fruit could be a class. Now that is a general term that describes lots of fruit. Now an apple is an instance of a class, right? It's an instance of the fruit class. A banana is also an instance. So a class is what embodies all of this together. And for example, an object is one particular thing within that class. Say an apple is one type of a a fruit, a banana is another type, and so on. Now, when we talk about properties and methods, we simply refer to things like variables and function. Now, these are not purely the same, but they are similar. Properties refer to what a class has. Now, for a human, some of the properties that I will have is my name, my height, my age, and so on. Method refers to the functionalities that can be performed by a class. Say, I can walk, right? I can speak. These are methods. So methods are verbs, properties are nouns for English students. We'll talk about constructors and destructors. And this simply refers to you actually just like the name constructor talks, you are actually constructing, meaning you are defining the base for a class. I define a class name and I want to set its initial values. So I use constructors. We'll actually get to this in detail when we start the course. You also have the concept of inheritance, which has to do with um, maybe a child class getting some properties and methods from a particular parent class, right? Just as the name states again, inheritance, right? Think of parent to child inheritance, right? Your name is maybe you as a parent, your name is Mr. John, and your son's name is maybe John, maybe Clement, or so forth. So you see, this is what inheritance is all about. There are a lot of other concepts we talk about, things like abstraction and interfaces, but I just wanted to briefly introduce this so that you're going to get an understanding of what they are before we actually move into it in detail. Hopefully, this is going to be a course that the part of the course that is very important, just like each of them. It's very important, and I think it's going to simplify things for you when you actually get to understand all of the concepts. It's going to simplify a lot of things for you. And like I will always say, it is nice that you always follow these courses with your computer and your code editor open, so that every example you practice it, and in that way you are really going to understand things. Yeah, I think that is it. In the next, we'll actually be moving into the details of object oriented programming. For this tutorial, we just wanted to introduce it.